I thought I was alone on the lake. Then I heard it. A scream that didn't sound human. I turned abruptly, the boat nearly tipping over, and I scanned the opposite shore. At first I saw nothing, just water, pine trees, and sunlight flickering on the surface. Everything looked normal, but then I saw something. A dark figure struggling at the edge, right where the boat entered the water. Something small, wet, struggling. And then it was gone. My heart stopped. It was a German Shepherd puppy. I didn't even think. I took off my boots, threw my fishing rod aside, and jumped into the icy spring water. It felt like being stabbed, so cold that it took my breath away and panic shot straight to my chest. But I didn't care. I swam away, my eyes fixed on the spot where I had last seen him. Every second counted. He was far too small, far too far away, and the water far too cold. I reached the reeds just as something brushed my arm. I reached down blindly and felt fur through the nest and the sleep. For a horrible moment, I thought he was already dead. Then the slightest movement. His paw twitched. He was alive. I pulled him to my chest and stepped back toward the boat, holding his wet, lifeless body close to me. His head hung sleepily on my shoulder, eyes closed. No sound, no movement, just a fragile little body that should never have been in this lake. When I pulled him into the boat, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold him. I wrapped him in my jacket and screamed into the wind, "Stay with me, don't give up now," quote. I started the engine and raced across the lake back to the dock. I had no plan, only a dying German Shepherd in my arms and this deep feeling in my gut that I couldn't let him go. Not today, not after everything he had been through. His chest didn't heave, his body was ice cold, but then his mouth opened slightly and I heard the faintest of broken gurgles. He was still struggling and so was I. Don't remember the screeching, just the slamming of tires and the door as I ran to the Northwoods Hospital, my wet jacket wrapped around the puppy. My boots slapped loudly on the tiled floor. I called out before the door slammed shut behind me. "Emergency, he can hardly breathe." The receptionist jumped up. Seconds later, a veterinary assistant came running over. I didn't want to let go of him. His little body barely moved in my arms. But I carefully placed him on the examination table and they got to work right away. It took 3 people, an oxygen mask, heated blankets, a syringe. Someone was gently pressing on his chest, someone else was wiping water from his mouth. And then I saw it. He was coughing barely noticeably, but it was something. "German Shepherd puppy," the vet murmured as she checked his heartbeat. "Male, maybe 6 months old, hypothermic, nearly drowned, but he has a pulse." I stood rooted to the wall, dripping wet, fists clenched. "He'll make it." The vet looked up. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were serious. "If you'd found him 5 minutes later, we'd be having a completely different conversation right now." My stomach lurched. 5 minutes. That was all that separated life and death. They took him to a warming unit, a small padded chamber under heat lamps with an IV in his leg. He looked like a ghost, smart, quiet, but he was still there. And for now, that was enough. "Can you sit with him?" the assistant said gently. I could help. I pulled up a chair, leaned forward, and carefully placed my hand on his crotch. He didn't move. His pads felt ice cold. "You were fighting out there," I whispered. "Don't stop now. I got you." Minutes passed, maybe hours, I don't know. The room was far too still, too quiet. Then his paw twitched. Tiny, involuntary. But I felt it. His body trembled slightly, as if a tiny flame inside him was still trying to reignite. I blinked, leaned closer, and whispered again. "Come back, buddy. I'm here." The assistant checked his levels and nodded. He was slowly stabilizing. Whatever he'd been through, he still had the fighting spirit. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. He was still fighting in danger, still fragile, but he wasn't slipping away anymore. I didn't know his name, where he came from, or who had left him to die in that freezing lake. But I did know one thing. He wasn't going back. They let me take him that evening, on one condition. I had to keep him warm, calm, and cared for. No stress, no noise, just patience and warmth. So I cleared a corner by the fireplace, laid down an old tin can, and carefully placed his sleeping body on it. He didn't wake up, only instinctively pulled himself together, as if he were somewhere else, somewhere cold, somewhere alone. The house felt different with him in it. I'd been living alone for years, ever since Sar had died, 6 years ago. Just me, the lake, and the silence. I thought I liked it that way, or at least I told myself I did. But now, with this soaking wet puppy breathing softly next to a boot, the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt empty. I knelt down next to him, carefully drying his fur with a towel, making sure not to move him much. His ribs were still sticking out. His tail twitched every now and then, as if he were dreaming of running away from something or maybe towards something. I brought him a bowl of warm water, held it in front of his mouth, nothing at first, then a sniff, very lightly, and then his tongue moved. A slow lick. I smiled. That's right, little one. If you keep going like this, we'll get it. He had no collar, no tag, no microchip, the vet had said, just an old, half-torn blue ribbon around his neck, as if someone had cared enough to mark him at some point and then forgotten about him completely. I sat with him for hours, feeding him broth from a spoon, warming him with a fresh towel from the dryer, and watching the fire flicker across his face. And sometime long after midnight, I dozed off in my chair. I woke up to a soft, hoarse wheeze. His eyes were open, barely, but enough. He looked at me as if he wasn't sure whether he could trust what he saw. As if I could be just another shadow in a world that had already taken too much from him. I didn't move, didn't say a word, just let him look. And after a long moment, he blinked and let his head sink back down to the covers. That was enough for me. He had seen me and hadn't looked away. The next morning, he was still breathing. He had barely slept. Maybe a few hours curled up in the chair, his head against the window, a blanket over his shoulders. But I didn't care. When I leaned forward and saw his chest rise and fall slowly, evenly, something broke open inside me. Relief, perhaps, or something older, something he hadn't felt in years. He didn't lift his head when I said good morning, but his eyes opened. He followed my movements, this was new. I brought him more broth, warm, slow. He took it in tiny sips from my fingers. His mouth quivered with each one, as if even this small effort was almost too much for him. But he tried. As I watched the steam rising from the cup, I saw my reflection in it, unshaven, tired, older than I remembered. Just you and you right now, I said softly, SHHR to myself then to him. He blinked once, slowly, not fearfully this time, just tiredly. I sat down on the floor next to him, my back against the sofa. Outside the window, the snow was almost gone. Here and there, muddy grass peeked through the white. Spring came late up here in Northwood, but it came. You could smell it. At some point, I sank into a memory. Me, 10 years old, sitting in the old kitchen. A German Shepherd puppy on my lap. Her name was Bonnie. She used to chew holes in my socks and I was never mad at her. She died when I was 17. I've never forgotten the sound of her claws clicking on the kitchen floor as she ran to the door when I came home. I hadn't thought about her in years. I looked down at the little guy on the blanket and wondered what memories he carried with him, what he dreamed about when his paws twitched, who he missed. Suddenly his legs twitched violently in his sleep, hard, like he was having a nightmare. Then a soft whimper came from him, barely audible. I moved closer. Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open again, but this time, when he saw me, he didn't just blink, he tried to move. It was awkward, a slow lift of the head, a paw reaching out in my direction. But it was the first time he had reached out for me of his own accord. My chest felt tight. You're a fighter, I whispered. A stubborn little survivor. And at that moment I realized I wasn't just caring about him. He was awakening something in me that I hadn't even known I had buried. In the afternoon, the sky above silver, pain turned soft and golden. I opened a window and the air smelled of dew from the earth and damp pine resin. Spring was slowly creeping back into the world, shy and quiet, as if it didn't want to attract attention. It tried to get up again. I was in the kitchen heating up more broth when I heard a dull scraping on the wooden floor. I turned around and there it was. Its legs were shaking, its body was trembling, but it was standing straight. Its head was hanging low, its ears folded down unevenly, but it was standing. I didn't move. Just watched. My breath caught in my throat. It took a step, slid a little, then another, and then it collapsed onto its chest, right on the blanket. First, I dropped the spoon and ran over. My heart was racing, afraid he had hurt himself. But his eyes were open. Alert, breathing fast, but not panicked. I knelt down next to him and smiled. "You're a stubborn little guy." "What?" Of course he didn't answer, but I swear there was a fleeting look on his face, as if he had understood the tone, if not the words. I helped him back onto the blanket and stroked gently behind his ear. His fur was rough there, still a little matted, but it was warmer now, alive, and then something suddenly dawned on me. He needed a name, more than just Buddy. A name matters. He's the first piece of identity, the first anchor in life. I looked into his eyes, deep brown, calm, and the name just came. Rex. He blinked once. No flinch, no fear, as if the word meant nothing to him yet. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe he was ready to find out what it might mean. Rex said, "I'll turn it down again." "That's you now." Later that evening, I opened the back door to let in some fresh air. Rex lifted his head from the ceiling and looked at the light streaming through the screen. He didn't move, just looked, watched the trees, the birds, the way the winter swirls, watched the world as if trying to remember what it was like to be a part of it. That night, he slowly crept closer to me, dragging one leg behind him, as I sat on the floor with a book. He didn't touch me, just lay down close. Close enough that I could hear his breath. Close enough that I could feel it in my chest. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in this house. Not entirely. 2 days later, he followed me to the door. I hadn't expected it. I was just putting on my boots, planning to go into town for a quick trip to get a few things. When I turned around, he was standing right behind me, a little wobbly, his ears pricked up, he was in front, his eyes alert. He hadn't made a sound, just stood there as if he had been waiting for the moment when I would turn around and see him. "Do you want to go out with me?" I asked. His tail didn't wag, but his eyes didn't say no either. It was a cool spring day. The sun was high above the trees. A few patches of ice still clung to the shady corners of the garden. Rex stepped onto the porch as if it might bite him. Slowly, carefully, testing each board under his paws. The wind picked up. I saw his nose twitch as all the new smells hit it. Hard, damp pine, mud, and the smoke from the neighbor's chimney across the pasture. He took another step, then two, and then he froze. His head turned toward the lake and something changed inside him. Every muscle tensed, his ears flattened, his breathing quickened, then came the sound, just a soft splash, a duck landing far out on the water. But that was enough. Rex ran. Not forward, but back. Panicked, kicking. His legs slid over the wood until he slammed into the doorframe. He whined, his eyes wide, trying to push the door open with his head. I opened it for him. He darted inside, huddled on the blanket by the fireplace, and didn't look at me anymore. I went after him, knelt down, and let him go. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have known. You're not ready yet." His whole body was shaking, not from the cold, from something deeper, from something older. I sat down on the ground nearby and waited. Minutes passed. Then I saw it, a fine scar around his neck. Barely visible under the fur. Not from a collar, from something tighter, like a rope. Someone hadn't just abandoned him. They had tied him up, abandoned him, wanted to let him drown. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut, and I hated how familiar this feeling felt, this helpless rage at something that couldn't be undone. He didn't need words to tell me, to say what had happened. His body remembered the lake, the fear, the betrayal, and yet he had followed me to the door. Still, he had tried. I reached out, slowly, and placed my hand behind his ear. He didn't flinch. That was progress. The next morning I found him at the door again. Not scratching, not at all, just sitting, still, watching. His posture was steadier this time, as if he wasn't asking permission but testing me. Testing the world. I slowly opened the door. He didn't move. Just the porch, I said quietly. One step at a time. He stepped out without hesitation. The sun was warmer that day. Steam rose from the damp grass. The air smelled of thawing bark and soft, wet earth. Rexand stood at the edge of the porch and took a deep breath. No trembling, no flinching, just watching. I walked along the path and after a moment I heard the soft screech of his paws behind me. We got halfway between the house and the edge of the woods before he stopped. I turned and saw him looking back at the lake. Silent, alert, I crouched down. This won't happen again. Not to you. He stopped, caught between fear and trust. Then he took a step forward, then another, and another, until he was standing beside me. We didn't go far, only to the edge of the woods, but it was enough. When we got back home, he was eating more than usual, sickly from his nap. Then he nudged him. When he was empty, as if he knew now that he was allowed to ask, as if the world had rules again. Later, as I sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, he curled up next to me and rested his head on my boots. His eyes fluttered closed in the wind, and for the first time since I had pulled him out of the water, I heard it. A sigh, soft, gentle, like a weight he had carried for so long had finally shifted a little, just enough to let him breathe. That night I carved his name into a piece of cedar and hung it above the fireplace where he slept. It wasn't much, just Rex, but it was something solid. Something that said you weren't just passing through. The next morning I called the shelter at the Igler K9 Rescue Center, as the vet had asked. A woman named Sarah answered. Friendly voice, professional. She asked the usual questions. Age, breed, condition, where I had found him. I told her the facts, but I didn't tell her not the way he looked at me when I said his name. I didn't tell her about the scar on his house, or how he flinched when he heard water, or how still the house felt when he couldn't breathe. She offered to take him in, said they had room, that they could both help find a home. Adoption. I thanked her and hung up. Then Rex was curled up on the carpet, a hand over his nose, whispering into the void. I don't know if I can let you go. A week later I was back at the lake. Not by chance. I had to know. I had replayed that morning too many times in my head. His position in the water, the way he had kicked, the direction. He had come from somewhere. Something wasn't right. Rex was walking low and tight in front of the fireplace when I crept out. I hated leaving him alone, even for an hour. But there was something nagging at the back of my mind. I had to investigate. The path on the other side of Silverpine was soft with mud. Frost still clung to the cattails. I walked the same stretch where I had first seen it, scanning the bank, stepping carefully through the marshy grass. Nothing for a while, just ice cracking in the current and the early call of geese above me. Then I saw it. Off the path, half submerged in the reeds, a crumpled wreck of aluminum, nearly torn in two, rusted, burned in places. A rope still hung loosely at one end, dragging in the water, and next to it, barely visible in the mud, a piece of torn fabric, blue, exactly the same color as the makeshift band that had been around Rex when I found him. I crouched down, my heart was pounding. The rope wasn't knotted as if to tie it up. It was a noose, frayed at the base, as if something or someone had tied it there. He didn't drive in. He didn't run away. He was left behind. Left behind for drowning. Tied to a sinking boat, with just enough slack to fight. That ribbon wasn't a hot melt ribbon. It was a placeholder for someone who never intended to come back. I stood there for a long time, staring at that boat, my fists clenched so tightly that my fingers went numb. I've seen a lot of bad things in my life. Accidents, neglect, but this was different. Someone had made a decision. Cold, final. And yet Rex fought his way to shore. I didn't call the sheriff, I didn't take any pictures. What was I supposed to say, that it felt so strange to be a half-dead man who had survived something bad? No, I wasn't interested in justice. I was interested in healing. When I got home, Rex was standing at the door, still limping, but stronger. He sniffed at my boots, his soul stiffening briefly in the mud from the lake. Then he looked up at me. He didn't know exactly what I had seen. But enough to feel it. Something happened between us in that moment, something quiet and old. I know what they did to you, I said quietly, but that's not your story anymore. He followed me into the house without a word, lay down by the fire again, and rested his head on my foot. We didn't say anything more, nor did we have to. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and listened to the wind blowing through the trees, to the house slowly settling as always. Only now there was a rhythm I had never noticed before. Soft breathing from the living room, the silent presence of a puppy that shouldn't be there anymore. Around 12 o'clock I got up and found him curled up on the carpet, his chest rising and falling in the light of the last embers. I sat down on the sofa and just looked at him. This little German shepherd puppy who had changed the way silence felt in this house. I hadn't planned any of this. I wasn't looking for a dog, and after Marbelle, my last German shepherd, I had sworn to myself, never again. She was with me through the hardest time of my life. Quote. And when she died, it felt like a door had closed that was better left closed. No more paw prints, no more goodbyes. That's what I had vowed to myself after Marbelle, but now this puppy had just stumbled into the room I thought I had locked long ago. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. I don't know what this is supposed to be, Rex, I said quietly. But you're making it really hard for me to pretend I don't care. His ears twitched, but he stayed where he was. The next day we tried another walk. A different path, one that led behind the cabin, away from the lake. Rex was cautious but curious. He sniffed at every branch, every tree stump, watching the birds with his head tilted and one paw slightly raised, as if he were slowly remembering how the world works. He even chased after a falling pine tree. Just once. Then he turned to me, as if he didn't know if that was allowed. I laughed for the first time in a long time. It stopped the trees and scared off a squirrel, causing Rex to prick up his ears with the closest thing to a wag of his tail. And for a brief, fleeting moment he looked like a perfectly normal puppy, not a survivor, not a victim, just a dog in the woods learning to be one again. But the peace didn't last long. As we rounded a bend, there was a loud bang somewhere in the distance, a car door. Someone down the street, out of sight. The sound was sharp, metallic, incongruous in the silence. Hex immediately fell flat to the ground. Body tense, ears flat, tail tucked between his legs. His breathing became shallow, rapid. He stared toward the sound as if it had claws. I knelt down beside him. It's okay, buddy. You're safe, no one's coming to hurt you. Quote. He didn't move. It took him a full 5 minutes to straighten up. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't have to. Whoever did this to him, whatever they used to scar him so much. They had scarred him deeper than any scar could show. But he had followed me. He had trusted me. And now it was my turn to show him that some sounds don't end in pain, that some doors lead to warmth, that some people stay. The storm came fast. A typical Minnesota spring storm. The wind turned furious in seconds. The trees groaned. Rain pelted the roof as if it wanted to burst through. The light flickered once and then stayed. I walked through the house, checking the windows, but my mind was on him. Hex had never reacted well to storms. I had learned that quickly. At the first thunder, he had crawled under the table and hadn't come out for hours. But this time was worse. There was something in the air. It wasn't just the weather, it was a memory. I found him pacing restlessly back and forth by the back door. Head down, ears flat, tail tucked close to his stomach. "It's all right," I said and slowly walked towards him. "It's just wind and noise." But he didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the trees outside, which bent like giant shadows in the wind. Then another clap of thunder crashed across the lake. He flinched violently, reaching in panic toward the hallway, toward the small gap behind the washing machine, where he had always hidden during the first week. But as he turned the corner, there was a loud crack outside, wood snapping. I knew the sound, a tree falling. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my jacket, and ran out onto the back porch. The old pine tree by the shed, half dead for years, had fallen, snapped off at the trunk, and tumbled down the slope behind the house. It had fallen onto the path, the same path Rex and I had been walking every morning for a week. I moved quickly, checking for damage, anything on the roof, anything urgent. That's when I heard it. A bark, short, desperate, distant. "Rex." I turned toward the house, but he wasn't at the door. Another bark. Further away now, toward the trees. He was outside. I didn't think twice, grabbed the leash, a jacket, and let the door flap open behind me. Rain immediately slapped my face as I ran through the undergrowth. The flashlight twitched with every step. And then I found him at the base of the unfallen tree, scratching at the branches, digging desperately. I shone my light where he was looking and he was staring. A small raccoon, barely alive, trapped beneath the branches. His eyes blinked slowly, half crushed, but he was breathing. Hex looked up at me and I saw something raw in his eyes. No panic, no confusion. Purpose. He hadn't run away out of fear. He had gone back because of something weaker than himself. I didn't know how he had found him or why it mattered to him. But it mattered to him and he wouldn't leave him alone. I stood there in the storm, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Something sacred in his silence. This puppy, this broken, battered, frightened little soul. He had just done something many people aren't capable of. He had seen pain and he hadn't looked away. I knelt down next to him, soaked to the bone, and whispered, "You're not what they wanted you to be. You're more." And in that moment, I wasn't the one who saved him. He saved me. In the morning, the storm was over. The world was dripping, still, the sky a pale blue, freshly washed, as if everything had been given a fresh start. I stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, and watched as Rex stretched out in a patch of sunlight on the deck. His fur was still damp in places, but his eyes, which shone, were brighter than ever. The raccoon hadn't survived the night. I had done what I could: blankets, warmth, rest. But some wounds can't be undone. Hex had sat by the crate the whole time. Watchful but still, like a sentinel. Not a sound from him, just presence. That's the kind of dog he was. And that morning, I knew the truth. He didn't belong anymore. He belonged to something bigger. Healing, trust. This quiet work that hardly anyone sees. I made the call. Sarah from the Igler Rika Nay Rescue Center answered. She sounded surprised to hear from me, as if she thought I had changed my mind. And I almost had, but I told her the truth. Rex was ready, and maybe I was too. We made an appointment. I spent the day with him as if it were the last. We walked down the path he used to be afraid of. This time he didn't flinch when we passed the lake.